From which city are you watching us tonight? I'd love reading your comments and seeing how far these stories travel. And if stories about family, reflection, and real-life moments speak to you, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video. It truly helps more than you know. Now, let me tell you what happened. That evening had settled in the way evenings do when life finally grows quiet again. The house was still, almost too still, the kind of stillness that hums softly in your ears. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, folding laundry that had long since cooled from the dryer. The lamp on my nightstand cast a warm yellow circle across the room, catching the dust in the air and the framed photos along the wall. In one of them, my son was smiling, missing a front tooth, his arm slung around my leg as if I were the only solid thing in the world. I was tired, but not sleepy. At my age, evenings often become a time of thinking, whether I want them to or not. I had reached that season of life where the days are full of responsibilities, but the nights belong to memory. I was thinking about how quickly the years had gone, how the house felt different now that my son was grown, taller than me, with a life that no longer revolved around my schedule. That was when I heard the knock. It was soft, hesitant, nothing like the confident knock he used when he was younger. For a moment, I just stared at the door. My first thought was that something was wrong. A mother never quite outgrows that instinct. "Come in," I said, keeping my voice steady. He opened the door slowly and stood there, one hand still on the handle. The hallway light framed him from behind, and for a split second I saw not the man he had become, but the boy who used to peek into my room after a bad dream. "Mom," he said, clearing his throat. "Do you have a minute?" I patted the bed beside me. "Of course." He sat down, careful, as if he didn't want to disturb anything. His knee bounced once, twice, then stopped. I noticed details the way only a mother does. The faint line between his brows. The way he clasped his hands together, just like his father used to when he was nervous. We sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the air conditioner filling the space between us. "I've been thinking," he finally said, "about us, about you." I turned toward him fully then. "Okay." He took a breath, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "I don't think I ever told you how much I noticed, how much you did when no one was looking." His words caught me off guard. I had expected questions about work or plans or maybe advice. Not this. "You were always there," he continued, "even when you were tired, even when you were scared. I didn't understand it back then, but I do now." I felt something loosen in my chest, something I hadn't realized I'd been holding tight for years. Parents don't often get acknowledgement. We move through the days doing what needs to be done, rarely stopping to ask how it all landed. "I made mistakes," I said quietly. "Plenty of them." He shook his head. "Maybe. But you also gave me a sense of safety I didn't realize was so rare until I saw other families." The room felt warmer somehow, as if his words had shifted the air itself. I looked around at the familiar walls, the furniture I'd chosen years ago when money was tight but hope was strong. This room had seen tears, prayers, and sleepless nights, and now it was witnessing something new. "I came in here because I needed you to know," he said. "I'm trying to figure out who I am, and a lot of that comes back to you, to the example you set." I reached out then, resting my hand over his. It was a simple gesture, natural, filled with the quiet understanding that only shared history can bring. "Thank you for telling me," I said, and I meant more than those 4 words could carry. We sat there a while longer, talking about small things and big ones, about the past and the road ahead. When he finally stood to leave, The house no longer felt so still. It felt alive, as if something important had been named, and in naming it, healed. After he left, I remained on the bed, the folded laundry forgotten. I realized that motherhood doesn't end when children grow up. It changes. It deepens. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it surprises you in ways that remind you why every hard moment mattered. That knock on my door was unexpected, but the conversation that followed stayed with me long after the lights went out. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because of worry, but because my mind kept returning to the sound of his voice, steady but vulnerable, as if he had handed me something fragile and trusted me not to drop it. Morning came slowly, gray light pressing against the curtains, and I lay there listening to the house wake up. The familiar creak of the floorboards, the distant hum of a passing car. Everything looked the same, yet I felt different inside it. Over breakfast, we moved around each other carefully, like two people learning a new rhythm. He poured coffee, I toasted bread. Ordinary actions, but there was a new awareness beneath them. I noticed how he waited for me to sit before taking his place at the table, how his eyes searched my face as if checking in. It was subtle, but it mattered. "You okay?" he asked, sliding the mug toward me. "I am," I said, and after a moment I added, "Are you?" He nodded. "Better than I've been in a while." We didn't say much more then. Some conversations don't need to be rushed. Still, the air between us held a quiet understanding, like we had opened a door and decided to leave it unlocked. Later that afternoon, I found myself in the living room, sorting through an old box of photographs. I hadn't planned to. My hands just seemed to know where to go. Pictures from school events, holidays, road trips where the car broke down, but we laughed anyway. I remembered how often I'd worried I wasn't enough, not patient enough, not strong enough, not prepared for the weight of raising a child mostly on my own. When he came in and saw the photos spread across the coffee table, he smiled. "I remember that one," he said, pointing to a faded picture of us at the county fair. "You let me win that game, even though I knew you could have knocked all the bottles down yourself." I laughed softly. "You noticed that?" "Of course," he said. "I noticed a lot more than you think." He sat across from me, picking up a photo carefully, as if it might tear under too much pressure. "I used to think being strong meant never needing help," he said. "But watching you showed me that strength can look quiet." His words settled deep. For years, I had carried the story of my life as one of endurance, of doing what needed to be done without complaint. Hearing it reflected back to me through his eyes gave it new shape. I didn't always feel strong, I admitted. Sometimes I felt like I was just getting through the day. He looked up then, meeting my gaze. That's what makes it real. We talked for a long time, longer than we had in years. About his doubts, his hopes, the pressure he felt to measure up to expectations he couldn't quite name. About my own dreams that had been set aside, not abandoned, just waiting. There was no judgment in the room, no need to fix anything, just listening. At one point, the sun shifted and lit up the room, catching the dust in the air the same way it had the night before. I thought about how many times I'd sat alone in that space, wondering if my efforts would ever be understood. And here it was, unfolding naturally, not as a grand moment, but as a series of honest ones. That evening, as we cleared the dishes together, he paused and said, "I'm glad I talked to you last night." "So am I replied. What I didn't say out loud was how that conversation had given me something unexpected, permission to see myself not just as a caretaker, but as a person whose life and choices mattered. As I went to bed that night, I felt a quiet sense of gratitude, not because everything was resolved, but because we had begun to see each other clearly, not just as mother and son, but as two people sharing a moment of understanding that would carry us forward. The days that followed took on a different texture. Nothing dramatic changed on the surface. We still went about our routines, still talked about work, errands, and the weather. But underneath it all, there was a new openness, like a window cracked just enough to let fresh air move through the house. One afternoon, I decided to take a walk after lunch. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes when most people are inside, living their separate lives. Trees lined the street, their leaves shifting gently in the breeze. As I walked, I thought about how many years I had spent focused almost entirely on being what others needed. A good mother, a reliable employee, a steady presence. Somewhere along the way, I had learned to put my own inner questions on hold. When I returned home, he was sitting at the kitchen table, papers spread out in front of him. He looked up when he heard the door. "I was hoping you'd be back soon," he said. "Everything okay?" I asked, setting my keys down. "Yeah, I wanted to ask you something." I sat across from him, noticing the familiar seriousness in his expression. It reminded me of when he was younger and faced a decision he knew mattered. "I've been thinking about making a change," he said, "in my work, in how I live." "That sounds important," I replied carefully. He nodded. "I keep asking myself what kind of life actually feels honest, and every time I do, I think about the sacrifices you made, not just what you gave up, but how you kept going without losing yourself." I smiled faintly. "I'm not sure I succeeded at that." "I think you did," he said. "At least enough to show me it's possible." His words landed gently, but firmly. I realized then that this wasn't just about him seeking guidance. It was about him recognizing the values that had shaped him and deciding whether to carry them forward. We talked about his fears, the risk of stepping away from something familiar, the uncertainty of choosing a different path. I listened, not as someone with all the answers, but as someone who had faced crossroads before and learned that clarity rarely comes without courage. "Whatever you decide," I told him, "make sure it's something you can stand behind when things get hard. That's what matters." He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "I hoped you'd say that." Later that evening, I found myself alone again in my room. The same lamp, the same quiet. But I felt less alone than I used to. I thought about how often I had wondered if my life had left any lasting mark beyond the obvious. Children grow up, move on. That's the natural order. But maybe what remains isn't the daily effort, but the example, the way we show up even when no one is applauding. There was a knock at the door, softer this time, almost familiar. "Come in," I said. He stepped in and stood near the doorway. "I just wanted to say good night." "Good night," I replied. He hesitated, then added, "Thank you for listening, for everything." After he left, I sat for a long time, letting the moment settle. I realized that this stage of life wasn't about holding on or letting go. It was about meeting each other where we were with honesty and respect. And in that space, there was room not just for reflection, but for growth, even now. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the bedroom in a way that made the dust motes shimmer like tiny stars. I sat on the edge of the bed, sipping coffee slowly, thinking about how our conversations over the past few days had shifted something fundamental in the house, in me and in him. It was as if a door had been left open, not for one fleeting moment, but for all the days to come. He came in quietly, holding 2 mugs. "Thought you might like a refill," he said, placing one beside me. I looked at him and noticed the lines around his eyes, subtle but telling, and the way he carried himself with the quiet confidence that comes from facing inner challenges honestly. "Thank you," I said. We sat in companionable silence, the kind that only years of shared life can make comfortable. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, rustling leaves like a soft conversation of their own. He finally spoke, voice low and reflective. "You know, I was thinking about how I always measured success by achievement. Promotions, milestones, things that could be checked off a list. But watching you navigate life, I realized success can be something quieter. Something about consistency, care, and presence." I turned toward him fully, realizing